So I wanted to go ahead and spend a little bit of time talking just a little bit about our second dynasty called the Abbasid dynasty. If you look at our handout, the first dynasty were the Umayyads, and there were some problems with the Umayyad dynasty. One problem with the Umayyad dynasty was that they were known for their irreligious behavior. They were known for kind of picking Arabs over other people, which was a real problem because they had a multi-ethnic empire, but were discriminatory. So the Abbasid Empire, well, it falls apart. The second empire we're going to talk about of these Muslims is the Abbasid Empire, and it says on the handout that their political life was centered in Baghdad, which is Iraq. In fact, if you look on the screen, if you look at the map, the first caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, was right here in Syria, in Damascus, Syria. The second capital is here in Baghdad, and that's a whole lot closer to this region here, which this region traditionally has been called Persia. This is modern day Iran. And that's a big deal because the second dynasty, kind of aware of these ethnic differences, is not going to be just Arabs get the jobs, not going to be just Arabs are going to get the good things. In fact, it says Persian influence was widespread, that this is the group of people here who speak Persian. In fact, if we look at this map, we can see that there's two parts of the world, of the Muslim world. There's the Arab-speaking world. The Arabic at first was just really here in the Arabian Peninsula, but Arabic spreads all throughout North Africa. Just like we see later in 1492, 1592, Spain will go to the New World, and all the people that they conquer, they'll force them to speak Spanish. Just like the British, when they come to the Americas, they go to parts of Africa, they go to Australia, they bring English with them. The Arabs, they are just these people here, but everywhere they go, North Africa starts speaking Arabic, the Middle East starts speaking Arabic. But this new dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, their capital's here in modern day Iraq, which is right next to this Persian area. They don't neglect this different cultural group. In fact, there is a widespread Persian influence. It says on your handout that the Persians, or modern day Iran, would never, we'll write down, it says Persian would never adopt Arabic as a spoken language, but we'll write down would use their alphabet. They would use their alphabet. I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. For example, for us, we use in English the Latin alphabet, but we're not the only culture alphabet. Spanish uses the same alphabet, the French, the Italians, the Germans, the Dutch. All these different languages are different languages. They sound different, but they use the same alphabet, the Latin alphabet. For example, on this slide, everywhere in green are countries that use the Latin alphabet. So for example, Spanish and Portuguese and English and French and Italian and Romanian and Danish and German, Icelandic, all these different languages use the Latin alphabet, but they sound very different. If you look at the blue, all the blue are areas that use the Arabic alphabet, but just because you use the same alphabet, it can sound different and you can have different languages. Just like we all use in Europe the Latin alphabet, but all these languages are very different. Everything in blue uses the Arabic alphabet. Here is, of course, the Arabic alphabet on the left, the Persian alphabet on the right. You can see the similarities. Here you have an example of Arabic, Persian, and Kurdish. These are three different languages, but they all use the same alphabet. And so that's what we see. We see that even though Persian is its own language, its own thing, they don't stop speaking Persian, but they do bring in the Arab alphabet. And this empire in general attracted a lot of people we call Mawali. These are non-Arab Muslims, that this empire is getting more than just Arabs to become Muslims. These are where the Arabs are from, but we're getting Persians to become Muslim, people from Afghanistan, people from Tajikistan, people from all around are now becoming Muslims. It's not just an only thing. And as a result, discrimination against non-Arabs slowly faded because there's a lot more multiculturalism in this Abbasid empire. That's what this Abbasid empire is known for, more multiculturalism. Another thing that this is known for is that during the Abbasid Empire, now that they're cool with different cultures and languages is that we see an expansion of literature and art and science and philosophy, the collection of hadith. This period is known as an Islamic, we'll write down the word golden age, Islamic golden age. It's during this time that they're translating a lot of stuff. In fact, it says translating Greek works into Arabic. Here's an example of some of the books and some of the texts that they are producing at this time. Some of the books they're producing this time include, like on this slide, medical books. This is a medical book, kind of giving people like how do you do a physical exam, kind of giving people instruction. This is an example of a translation. This was a Greek book on physics. It's been translated, you can see, into Arabic. Here is another book. This is actually a map of the world. If you look at this, it's kind of inverted. This is the South Pole and this is the North Pole. And that means, like, traditionally this is flipped. This is Africa then. This is Egypt right here. This is Saudi Arabia. Here's India. Here's China. This would be Spain. This would be Italy. This would be Greece. And so you can see how the world has been flipped in a sense, but they are producing these ancient maps, translating it. And it kind of raises the question, like, why is it okay to put the South Pole here and the North Pole here? Well, why not? I mean, if you were to flip the map like this, the only reason, it's not like the North Pole is labeled that the North has to be up and South has to be down. But who makes our traditional maps? Well, our traditional map is made by Americans, and our traditional map is made by Europeans. And so, of course, you're going to put yourself in a position being on top, but there's no scientific, there's no historical, there's no objective reason. North America and Europe on top and Africa on the bottom. We just do that because the people in power create maps. These people in power, they didn't put it the way we traditionally have it. Here, the poles were inverted, and there's no reason not to. It says on the handout they translated Greek works into Arabic, and this, it says on the handout, was helpful to Europeans whose early Greek works, we'll write down, were lost. The Muslims have these vast libraries where they have these translated works of European works, Greek works into Arabic, and that was helpful because there was a time and there was a period that even though Europeans had produced science books, even though the Europeans had produced physics books, the Europeans had actually lost some of their works. And so it would be very helpful that the Muslims took some of these great works and translated them into Arabic, and later they'd actually be able to give them back to the Europeans. It says Muslims would reintroduce them to Europe through Muslim Spain. It talked about on the map that, Islam had controlled Spain, and as they're taking and translating different books in Baghdad, Muslim Spain is still ruled by Muslims. It was called Al-Andalus, and that is a place that they're reintroducing some of these books. Well, political fragmentation, it turns out this empire is huge. In fact, it's going to be really just too big to hold together. It says, too big, the Muslim world was 1/4 of the way around the world, from Spain to India. That's how big the Muslim world is, from Spain here all the way to the Indus River Valley. That is a big empire. We're going to see is actually the Abbasid Empire itself is really too big to hold together. So what happens is it starts fragmenting, it starts breaking away. In fact, it says on the handout where it says too big, it says one area that breaks off is the Persian region. Modern-day Iran would gain independence. Modern-day Iran would gain independence. We see them break off. And it says below that, that the use of Persian would remain as a second Muslim language. We look at that division, Iran breaks off from this Muslim empire, and they're still Muslim. They get political independence, but they keep their own language. In fact, Persian remains a second Muslim language. Iran, your handout, remains today distinct from the rest of the Muslim world. That even though Iran is a Muslim nation, you can see that there is something different from Iran, from these other countries. These other countries are all Muslim, but they speak Arabic, and Iran does not. That is something that makes Iran different from the Middle East in the neighborhood. In fact, it says Iran is often in conflict with Arab-speaking Muslims. Even though the Persians, they are Muslim and the Arab speakers are Muslim, there is a cultural divide that even to this day, Iran and Saudi Arabia, both Muslims, they do not get along. Not only does the Persians break off, but Spain breaks off as well. In fact, it says on the handout that Umayyad Spain, sometimes called Al-Andalus, was a blending of Jews and Christians and Muslims. That all three of these groups were here. You had Jews living in Spain. You had Muslims who had conquered. You had these Christians that were the majority. And all three of them blended their influences together in Al-Andalus Muslim Spain. For example, you had Jews and Christians and Muslims all working together. It says that Al-Andalus, which again means Muslim Spain, was home to people like Maimonides, who was a famous Jewish thinker. That Jews were allowed to be teachers, Jews were allowed to be bankers, Jews were allowed to practice professions, and we have this famous Jewish thinker, Maimonides. We also have another famous man, Al-Andalus, it says, was a home to a guy named Averroes, who was a famous Muslim thinker. So it didn't matter in Al-Andalus that if you were a Jew, if you were a Muslim, if you were a Christian, it was a place where all these three religions worked together without problem. In fact, it says another great thing about Muslim Spain is it's Muslim Spain that Muslims brought knowledge of medical texts from the Middle East into Europe. That because there are all these Muslims in Spain, and because these Muslims have translated medical books and translated scientific books, even if these books were originally from Greece, then they got sent to Baghdad, they were translated here into Arabic, they spread throughout North Africa, and then brought back to Europe. So it was a great way that Europe was able to re-obtain books that they had lost. It says on your handout that Arabic science books were translated in Al-Andalus by Jews and by Christians. And so these Arabic books came into Spain, science books and geometry books, and they got these books, and it was in Spain that Jews who were bilingual, Christians who were bilingual, translated these and were able to introduce more learning into the rest of Europe because of these Arabic books that were brought in. There is a vocabulary we need to know, and it's the word ulama, and these are religious scholars whose job is to interpret the law. And so we have all this reading and all this writing, and now there's debates about what is it okay to do and what is it okay not to do. And we've already introduced you to a vocabulary word called Sharia, which is Islamic law, but now we have a specialized group of people whose job is to interpret that law. Those scholars, those people who study the Quran and study the Hadith and study and write recommendations for Sharia law, they are called the ulama, religious scholars. Their job is to interpret the law. Okay, so the Muslim world exists, but there are now problems within the Muslim world. I told you that this empire was just too big to stay together. Again, here's the Abbasid dynasty, the Persian part, it breaks away. You can see the Spain, it's still Muslim, but it breaks away, and much more of the empire begins to do that as well. In fact, there's this region here where there's a group of people that are called the Turks. It says that after the year 1000, the Turks come into Muslim lands. These guys are horsemen, which means that they're nomadic. They're originally from Central Asia, and they sweep in, we'll write it down, and help to fragment the Muslim empire. They help fragment the Muslim empire. These are a group of nomads called the Turks, and they come in and they invade and they help actually to break up this Abbasid empire. These are not non-Muslims. These are not people who hate Islam. These guys have become Muslim, but they invade for power, and they helped to break up this empire. It says on the handout, this Muslim empire was broken up by Muslim nomads. They were broken up by Muslim nomads. So this is a problem that the Abbasid Empire, too big to hold together, from India to Spain, it breaks up partly because these Muslims come in and they break up the Abbasid Empire. After that, there are also problems from outsiders. And the problem for outsiders, first of all, is when we look at this is the Holy Land, and the Holy Land was originally Christian Holy Land. Christians and Jews loved Jerusalem. Jerusalem's where Jesus did much of his work. It's where Jesus was crucified. It was where Jesus' tomb was. But Muslims, when they came in, they actually conquered the Holy Land. And hundreds of years had gone by, and Christians thought, we want to free the Holy Land. Just like Spanish people were going to be for hundreds of years trying to liberate the Iberian Peninsula, Christians thought, well, you know what? We want to liberate the Holy Land because this was our land first. It was a land of Jews first. It was a land of Christians next, and Muslims had conquered it. Well, the Christians said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a holy war called the Crusades, and we're going to, all of us from Europe, band together to invade the Middle East to liberate the Holy Land. It says on the handout that Western European Christians, these are Roman Catholics encouraged by the Pope, sought to liberate, were seeking to liberate the Holy Land. They were seeking to liberate the Holy Land. In fact, the Pope told them, if you go on this war and if you die on this quest, you'll actually have your sins forgiven and you'll go to heaven. So some people went to war because they really believed it was the right thing to do to free the Holy Land in the Crusades. Some people went to war because they thought, hey, I want to get my sins forgiven. This is the only way to know. Some people's interpretations by going to war and fighting for the Holy Land. And other people went to war because if I go to war against the Middle East, we might get some free stuff out of this. We might get some land, we might get some wealth. So people were seeking to liberate the Holy Land. It says below that the Holy Land had been captured by Muslim forces. They had captured Jerusalem in, we'll write down the year 1099. But because of those groups of people I mentioned just a few moments ago, I mentioned that there was a group of people called the Turks. They were Muslims, and here you can see them here, the Seljuk Turks. They kind of broke up their own empire, their own Muslim empire. And in that time of chaos, the white European Christians came in and they were able to have some success. It says because of Muslim disunity, because of regionalism, European Christians were able to briefly take the Holy Land. They were able to briefly take the Holy Land. Because those Turks had caused chaos, this allowed the Christians to come in and briefly take over everything in pink for a few hundred years. But the Christians, we'll write down, were eventually kicked out by the Muslims. So this assault from without, this attack from non-Muslims did not last long. It was not successful. But there is a group that was far more successful called the Mongols. This was a nomadic group of nomads that destroyed the Abbasid Empire. Anything that was left from the Turks was wiped out by the Mongols. And in fact, they laid waste to the most important city called Baghdad. That's spelled, if you don't know, Baghdad. They destroyed Baghdad in 1258. And I want you to write one more thing for Baghdad. This is a picture of the Mongols attacking Baghdad. It was home to a lot of this learning, a lot of this translation. And I want you to write down one of the buildings that was destroyed underneath Baghdad. It's called the House of Wisdom. Write down the House of Wisdom. And we're going to write down what happened there. This was a library in Baghdad, the House of Wisdom, where a lot of translation occurred. They translated Greek works into Arabic. And we think that when the Mongols destroyed Baghdad, Baghdad was almost like an Austin, Texas of the time. Austin, Texas, where the University of Texas is here in Texas. It's very ethnically diverse. People go there for college, for learning. That's how Baghdad was. It was like the Austin, Texas of the Middle East. And they had this massive library called the House of Wisdom. You should take note. It was where translation happened. They probably had hundreds of thousands of books in the House of Wisdom, this library in Baghdad. And when the Mongols came, guess what they did to this library? They destroyed it. In fact, they threw these books into the river that ran by it. People said the river ran black with the ink that was from all the books that were destroyed. And so the House of Wisdom is destroyed. We see attacks from without, the attacks from within the Muslim world. Turks who are Muslim helped break up the Muslim empire regionally. We have non-Muslims attack the Christian Crusades, take advantage of the chaos from the Turks. They're briefly successful, and then finally we have the Mongols that destroy the whatever is left. And so that's what we have with our notes. We've come to an end. We'll make sure we'll fill this out and we'll submit it, and you will have a great day. Thank you all so much.